The sun rose gently over the Vatican, spilling golden light on the ancient walls and cobblestone streets. Birds sang softly and a quiet breeze moved through the trees in the gardens. Normally, the Vatican was a place full of calm and routine, but today felt different. Something in the air made Marco, a young Swiss guard, feel nervous. Today was not an ordinary day. Today was the funeral of Pope Francis, a man admired by millions around the world. The city outside was unusually quiet, as people prepared to honor a leader who had inspired kindness, humility, and hope. Marco adjusted his uniform carefully. The colors were bright and perfect, the stripes and buttons polished to shine in the morning light. He had been a Swiss guard for 3 years, and he always took pride in his appearance and his duties. Every movement mattered. Every step was precise. He had practiced standing perfectly still for hours, and he knew that even a small mistake could be noticed. Yet this morning he could not shake the feeling that something unexpected would happen. Inside the grand halls of the Vatican, preparations were in full swing. Staff moved quickly, arranging flowers and candles. Musicians tuned their instruments and priests walked slowly, checking every detail of the ceremony. Marco stood at attention near one of the tall marble pillars. He watched quietly as the people around him moved with purpose and care. The air smelled faintly of incense and fresh flowers, creating a mix of calm and solemnity. As Marco waited, he thought about Pope Francis and the stories he had heard about him. People spoke of his kindness to the poor, his gentle words to those in need, and his courage to speak about hope even in difficult times. Marco had seen the Pope in person once during a special audience, and the memory was clear in his mind. The Pope had smiled warmly and nodded at him. That simple gesture had left a lasting impression. Today, thousands of people would remember that smile and all the good the Pope had done. The chapel doors opened slowly, and the first visitors arrived. They moved quietly, their heads bowed in respect. Marco kept his eyes forward, his posture perfect. He noticed the nervous energy of some visitors, their hands trembling slightly as they held cameras or programs. He understood their feelings. This was a rare and important moment, one that people would remember for a lifetime. Then he saw them. The other Swiss guards standing in line, each one perfectly still and disciplined. Marco felt a sense of pride. He was part of something bigger than himself, something meaningful. But as the minutes passed, he noticed a small difference today. Some of the guards looked tense in a way he had not seen before. Their eyes shifted nervously and their movements were slightly sharper. Something was different, and Marco could not understand it. A sudden hush fell over the room. The main doors of the chapel opened, and a slow, quiet procession began. Priests, dignitaries, and Vatican officials walked carefully toward their places. Marco's heart beat faster. He had seen ceremonies before, but today felt heavier, full of emotion. Each step, each movement carried importance. He focused on his duty, telling himself to remain calm and alert. As the procession moved closer, Marco felt a strange mixture of pride and anxiety. He wondered if he would remember every detail of this day. He wondered if he could do his duty perfectly when the world was watching. And deep down he felt a sense that something unexpected was about to happen, something that could change the way he saw his role as a guard forever. Marco adjusted his gloves and straightened his back. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Outside, the sunlight continued to warm the ancient city. Inside, every person present carried the memory of Pope Francis in their hearts. And in that quiet, tense moment, Marco realized that today, the Vatican would witness more than a ceremony. Today, it might witness a moment that would be remembered for years to come. The chapel was now filled with people from all over the world. The air felt heavy with quiet anticipation. Priests in white robes moved carefully, and dignitaries whispered softly to one another. Marco stood in his assigned position, feeling the weight of his uniform and the responsibility it carried. Every detail mattered. Every motion could be noticed by thousands. He had trained for this moment, but the unusual tension made his heart beat faster. As he scanned the crowd, Marco noticed something strange. One of the Swiss guards near the center of the hall was slightly out of line. At first, Marco thought it might be a mistake. Every guard had been instructed to maintain perfect formation, to follow every rule with precision. But as Marco watched more closely, he realized it was no accident. The guard was acting intentionally, moving in a way that broke the strict order. Marco's curiosity grew. He could see that the guard's hands were steady, his uniform perfect, and his posture proud. Yet he took a small step forward at a time when every guard was expected to remain still. Marco's mind raced. Why would someone break protocol at a moment so important? Was it a sign of disrespect or something else? He could not understand it, but he could feel the emotion behind the action. The guard's movement was subtle but noticeable. Marco saw the slight tilt of his head, the careful way he shifted his weight, and the deep, respectful bow he made. It was different from the formal gestures the guards had practiced. It carried a personal feeling, almost as if the guard was expressing something from his heart rather than following strict rules. Marco felt a mixture of surprise and admiration. This small act of courage drew his attention completely. The people in the chapel began to notice as well. A few visitors glanced at the guard with curiosity, whispering to each other. Some of the dignitaries raised their eyebrows in surprise, unsure if the movement was intentional or a mistake. Even the priests seemed to hesitate, their hands paused in the air as they adjusted their robes. The quiet hum of the room was suddenly interrupted by a shared sense of wonder. Marco watched carefully, trying to remain calm while feeling a rush of emotion. He understood that the guard was risking criticism. The rules of the Swiss guard were strict. Breaking them could lead to serious consequences. Yet the gesture felt genuine, full of respect and deep feeling. Marco realized that it was not just a movement. It was a message. It was a silent way of showing honor to Pope Francis, a way to express what words could not. As the guard completed the small action, Marco noticed something else. A few other guards exchanged brief glances, unsure of how to react. Some looked concerned, while others seemed to admire the courage it took to act this way. Marco felt proud of his fellow guard. The discipline and precision of their training were important, but today, he understood that there was room for heart and sincerity even within strict rules. Marco thought about Pope Francis and the lessons he had taught. The Pope often spoke about compassion, humility, and courage. He encouraged people to act from their hearts and to show kindness in every situation. Marco realized that the guard's unexpected movement reflected those same values. It reminded everyone that even in the most formal and serious moments, human emotion had a place. The moment passed quickly, but its impact lingered. Marco took a deep breath, feeling both nervous and inspired. He knew that today would be remembered not only for the ceremony, but also for the courage and respect shown in small, meaningful ways. The unusual action of the guard had changed the mood in the chapel. It added a personal touch to the formal proceedings, making the ceremony feel warmer and more connected to the life of Pope Francis. As Marco stood at attention, he decided to watch closely for what would come next. The chapel was still quiet, but the tension had shifted. Something had changed, and Marco could sense it. He knew that this day would be different from any other he had experienced. The combination of strict protocol and heartfelt emotion created a unique atmosphere, one that could leave a lasting impression on everyone present. The chapel was silent as the ceremony continued. Every person present felt the weight of the moment. Priests moved carefully, dignitaries adjusted their robes, and visitors watched with quiet respect. Marco remained at his post, his eyes focused on the unfolding scene. He noticed every detail, every shift of movement, every change in expression. He had never felt such a mix of anticipation and nervous energy in all his years as a Swiss guard. Then it happened. The guard who had shown the small, unexpected gesture earlier did something more noticeable. As the coffin of Pope Francis entered the chapel, the guard stepped forward slightly, bowing deeply in a way that had not been rehearsed. The movement was deliberate and precise, yet it broke the strict formation that all guards were expected to maintain. Marco felt his heart race. He knew instantly that this was against protocol. Gasps moved quietly through the crowd. Visitors whispered to each other, their eyes wide with surprise. Even some of the priests paused, unsure how to react. Marco watched the guard closely. He noticed the steady determination in his eyes and the gentle reverence in his posture. It was clear that this was not a mistake. The guard was acting out of respect, not defiance. He wanted to show his honor in a way that rules could not fully capture. Marco felt a mixture of fear and admiration. Breaking protocol could have serious consequences, even for a Swiss guard. Yet the action seemed to touch something deeper in everyone present. People could feel the sincerity behind the gesture. It was a moment of humanity in the middle of strict ceremony. Marco realized that the guard was not just following his duty, he was expressing his heart. The crowd responded quietly but powerfully. A soft murmur moved through the visitors. Some nodded slowly, recognizing the bravery it took to act this way. Others smiled gently, touched by the unexpected display of respect. Marco looked around and saw that the atmosphere of the chapel had changed. The moment had brought warmth into the solemnity, making the ceremony feel more personal and alive. Marco thought about the life of Pope Francis. The Pope had always emphasized compassion, humility, and courage. He had encouraged people to act from their hearts and to show kindness in every situation. The guard's bold gesture reflected these values perfectly. Marco felt proud to witness such a moment. It reminded him that rules and discipline were important, but genuine respect and courage could shine even brighter. As the guard straightened, Marco noticed how smoothly he returned to his position. There was no hesitation, no sign of guilt. His action had been controlled, respectful, and full of meaning. Marco realized that this was not only a brave act, but also a carefully considered one. The guard had found a way to honor the Pope while maintaining dignity. It was a lesson in courage, respect, and humanity all at once. Other guards seemed to react subtly. Some glanced at each other with quiet approval, recognizing the courage it took to break protocol in such a thoughtful way. Marco felt inspired by the collective awareness among the guards. It was as if the ceremony had become more than a ritual. It had become a living tribute full of emotion and meaning. The rest of the ceremony continued, but Marco could feel the difference. The guard's unexpected bow had shifted the energy of the chapel. It had reminded everyone present that even in the most formal and disciplined moments, human emotion had a place. Marco thought about how the Pope would have felt seeing this. He imagined a gentle smile and a quiet nod, the way Pope Francis had often encouraged people to act with kindness and courage. As the ceremony moved forward, Marco remained alert but inspired. He realized that today was not only about honoring the Pope, but also about witnessing small acts of bravery that carried immense meaning. The guard had broken the rules in a way that respected the heart of the ceremony. Marco understood that this moment would be remembered for a long time. It was a reminder that even in strict traditions, humanity could shine through. The chapel remained quiet, but the atmosphere had changed. The small but bold action of the Swiss Guard created a ripple of surprise and curiosity. Visitors who had been watching solemnly now shifted their attention to the guard who had stepped out of line. Some faces reflected amazement, others awe, and a few carried expressions of confusion. People whispered softly to one another, unsure if what they had seen was allowed. Marco watched carefully, his eyes following the movements of both the guard and the crowd. He noticed that the murmur of whispers spread quickly but quietly. Dignitaries and guests from different countries leaned slightly toward one another, speaking in low tones. Despite the quiet, the energy in the room was different. It was warmer and more personal. The guard's action had touched something in everyone's heart, even without words. Marco felt a strange sense of pride. The guard had shown courage and respect at the same time. Breaking protocol in such a strict and formal environment was risky, yet it had made the ceremony feel more meaningful. The movement reminded Marco that respect and humanity could exist even in the most disciplined settings. He realized that the guard had expressed something that words could not convey. Visitors in the front rows seemed particularly moved. One elderly man gently bowed his head, silently acknowledging the courage of the guard. A young woman held her hands together tightly, her eyes glistening with emotion. Even children present seemed to notice the significance, their small faces showing curiosity and admiration. Marco understood that the gesture had created a connection between the formal ceremony and the human heart. Some officials and Vatican staff exchanged brief glances. A few appeared concerned, whispering about the guard's action. Marco sensed the tension in those moments, but he also noticed a growing sense of understanding. The guard's bow, though unexpected, carried a genuine respect for Pope Francis and for the ceremony itself. It reminded everyone that the purpose of their gathering was to honor a man who had inspired love, humility, and compassion in countless people. Marco looked at the other Swiss guards. Most of them had returned to their positions and stood perfectly still. Some gave subtle nods of approval to the guard who had stepped out of line. There was a quiet understanding among them. They recognized the bravery it had taken to act in this way. Discipline and rules were important, but so was the courage to honor someone sincerely when the moment called for it. The music in the chapel continued softly, yet it seemed to harmonize with the emotional weight of the moment. Marco could hear the gentle notes of the organ and the quiet rustle of robes as priests moved. The sound created a feeling of reverence and warmth. It was as if the entire chapel had been transformed by a single act of courage. Marco realized that this ceremony was not just a formal event, but also a shared human experience. Visitors continued to observe the guard. Some quietly smiled, appreciating the sincerity of the gesture. Others leaned forward slightly, hoping to capture the significance of the moment in their minds. Marco noticed a few journalists taking careful notes and photos. They seemed to understand that this small movement carried meaning far beyond the walls of the chapel. It was a story of respect, courage, and humanity. As the ceremony moved forward, Marco remained focused on his duties, yet his mind replayed the scene over and over. He thought about how the crowd had reacted and how the atmosphere had shifted. The guard's decision to step out of line had created a quiet but powerful reminder that genuine emotion and respect could shine through even in formal and disciplined settings. Marco knew that this moment would remain in the memories of everyone present for a long time. By the time the coffin reached its final place, the chapel had settled into a quiet but deeply reflective mood. Marco felt a sense of calm mixed with inspiration. He understood that today's ceremony was more than a ritual. It was a living tribute to the Pope, and the guard's unexpected action had added a human touch that no words or rules could ever capture. The ceremony continued, and a sense of deep reflection settled over the chapel. Visitors, dignitaries, and staff all remained quiet, listening to the words spoken about Pope Francis. Priests spoke with calm voices, sharing stories of his life, his humility, and the countless acts of kindness he had performed. Each word reminded everyone why they had come to honor him. Marco listened carefully, feeling the weight of history and the importance of his duty. As the speakers described the Pope's dedication to helping the poor, supporting peace and encouraging compassion, Marco felt a mix of pride and sorrow. Pride because he was part of this historic event, and sorrow because someone so special was no longer with the world. Yet the stories brought warmth to the room. They reminded everyone of the difference one person could make in countless lives. Marco thought about how the Pope had touched the hearts of people far beyond the walls of the Vatican. The guard who had stepped out of line earlier remained in his position, standing tall and proud. Marco noticed that his calm demeanor and respect had not gone unnoticed. People were still watching him quietly, but now there was admiration in their eyes. The guard's gesture had added a personal and emotional layer to the ceremony. It reminded everyone that honoring someone was not only about following rules but also about showing genuine respect from the heart. Marco reflected on the meaning of that gesture. He realized that the guard had acted with courage, yet with complete reverence. It was a reminder that sometimes small acts could have a powerful impact. The guard had risked criticism, yet he had chosen to express his true feelings. Marco felt inspired. He understood that respect and honor were not only shown in formal actions, but also through heartfelt gestures. The priests continued to speak, sharing more stories of Pope Francis's compassion. They described how he would spend time listening to people, comforting those who were lonely and encouraging children and young adults to be kind and brave. Marco thought about how many lives the Pope had touched in his lifetime. The stories made the chapel feel alive with memory and gratitude. Each person present seemed to carry a piece of that spirit in their hearts. Visitors began to reflect on their own experiences. Some silently remembered moments when they had felt comforted or guided by the Pope's words. Others thought about the importance of kindness and courage in their own lives. Marco noticed that the mood of the chapel had shifted from solemnity to inspiration. The ceremony was no longer just a formal event. It was a reminder of how one person's life could leave a lasting impact. Marco felt a renewed sense of purpose. He thought about his role as a Swiss guard and the responsibility he carried. He realized that his duty was not only to follow rules, but also to honor the values that the Pope had taught. Respect, courage, and humanity were just as important as discipline and tradition. The guard who had broken protocol had shown this lesson clearly. Marco made a silent promise to carry this understanding with him in all future duties. As the ceremony approached its final moments, Marco looked around the chapel. The visitors remained attentive, the priests calm and dignified, and the guards disciplined and respectful. Yet there was a warmth in the room that had not been there at the beginning. It was as if the Pope's spirit was present, touching everyone quietly. Marco realized that the unexpected gesture of one guard had allowed the ceremony to feel more personal, more heartfelt, and more meaningful to everyone in attendance. The stories of Pope Francis's life continued to echo in the minds of all who were present. Marco thought about how rare it was to witness such an event, one that combined history, tradition, and emotion so perfectly. He felt grateful to be a part of it, and he understood that the memory of this day would remain with him forever. The legacy of Pope Francis was not only in his words but also in the way people remembered him, acted with courage, and showed respect from the heart. Marco took a deep breath and straightened his posture. The chapel was quiet, filled with reflection and admiration. He knew that the lessons of the day were clear. Respect, courage, and heartfelt actions mattered as much as rules and discipline. And in that moment, he felt connected to a long line of people who had been inspired by Pope Francis's life, and to the small but powerful gestures that could leave a lasting impression on everyone around. After the ceremony ended, the chapel slowly emptied. Visitors left quietly, speaking in low voices about the emotions they had felt. Marco remained for a few moments, standing still near the marble pillar. The echoes of prayers, music, and whispered words lingered in the air. The sun outside was beginning to set, casting soft golden light across the Vatican courtyard. Marco felt a quiet calm, but his mind was full of thoughts. He thought about the guard who had broken protocol earlier. Marco could not stop replaying that moment in his mind. The deep, respectful bow had been small in action but enormous in meaning. It had caught the attention of everyone in the chapel and had shifted the atmosphere in a remarkable way. Marco realized that the gesture had not been about showing disobedience. It had been about expressing respect, honor, and humanity in a moment that deserved more than just formal actions. Marco closed his eyes briefly, imagining the courage it had taken to act that way. The guard had risked criticism and the strict rules of the Swiss Guard, yet he had chosen to follow his heart. Marco felt a mix of admiration and inspiration. He understood that sometimes the most meaningful actions were the ones that required courage, even when they went beyond what was expected. He thought about his own role in the ceremony. Marco had followed every rule perfectly, standing still and watching attentively. He had performed his duties with discipline and precision. But now he realized that discipline alone was not enough. To truly honor the memory of Pope Francis, one needed both respect for tradition and the willingness to act from the heart. The guard's small act had shown him that lessons could come from courage, humility, and thoughtfulness. Marco walked slowly toward a window, looking out at the quiet streets of the Vatican. The golden light reflected on the ancient stones, and he felt a sense of connection to the long history of the place. He thought about the generations of Swiss guards who had served here, following rules and protecting the Vatican with care. He felt proud to be part of that tradition. At the same time, he felt a new understanding of what it meant to serve with heart. The young guard who had stepped out of line came to stand beside Marco. They exchanged a brief glance, a silent acknowledgement of what had happened. No words were needed. Marco saw respect and calmness in the guard's eyes. It was clear that the action had been thoughtful, deliberate, and full of meaning. Marco realized that leadership and courage could be shown quietly, without drawing attention to oneself, yet still make a powerful impact. Marco reflected on Pope Francis's teachings. The Pope had always encouraged people to act with kindness, to help those in need, and to show humility and courage. Marco realized that the guard's gesture embodied these lessons perfectly. Even in a strict and formal setting, the guard had chosen compassion, respect, and courage over blind obedience. Marco felt inspired to carry this understanding into his own life and service. He thought about the visitors, the dignitaries, and everyone who had been present. The guard's act had left an impression on all of them, even if they did not fully understand the rules that had been broken. Marco realized that courage and sincerity could communicate more than words or ceremonies ever could. The memory of that small, respectful bow would remain in the hearts of everyone present for a long time. As the sunlight faded, Marco felt a sense of peace. He understood that this day had taught him something important about duty, respect, and humanity. The ceremony had honored Pope Francis, But it had also reminded everyone that courage and heart could shine even in the strictest environments. Marco knew that this lesson would stay with him, guiding him in his duties and in life. He straightened his posture and looked around the quiet chapel. The echoes of the ceremony had faded, but the meaning of the day remained clear. Marco smiled softly, feeling grateful for the opportunity to witness such a powerful moment. He realized that sometimes the smallest acts done with sincerity and courage could leave the strongest impact. Today he had learned the true value of heart in service, and he would carry that lesson with him forever. Days passed after the funeral of Pope Francis, yet the memory of the ceremony remained vivid in the minds of everyone who had attended. Stories of the young Swiss guard who had stepped out of line traveled quietly among the visitors, the priests and the staff. Marco remembered the moment clearly. It had been small, simple, and respectful, yet it carried a message that words could not fully express. The Vatican seemed different now. A sense of warmth lingered among the staff and guards. Even those who had been strict about rules found themselves reflecting on the meaning of the guard's gesture. Marco noticed subtle changes in the way people interacted. There was a quiet acknowledgement that rules and discipline were important, but so were courage, respect, and the ability to act from the heart. Visitors who returned to the Vatican spoke about the ceremony to their friends and families. They described the profound impact of the guard's action and how it had made the funeral feel more personal. People were inspired not just by the life of Pope Francis, but also by the display of respect and courage from someone within the strict walls of the Swiss Guard. Marco realized that the small gesture had created ripples far beyond the chapel. Marco thought about how this lesson could apply to everyday life. The guard had acted with sincerity, choosing to honor the Pope in a way that was personal and genuine. Marco understood that this was a reminder that rules should guide people, but the heart should lead them. He felt proud to be part of an organization that could balance discipline with humanity. It was a powerful lesson in leadership, courage, and respect. The other guards spoke quietly among themselves, reflecting on the ceremony and the moment that had changed the atmosphere of the chapel. Some had been inspired to act with more thoughtfulness and care in their duties. Marco listened to their discussions and felt a sense of connection with his colleagues. The act of one guard had reminded everyone that even small, intentional gestures could make a difference in the lives of many. As Marco walked through the Vatican halls, he noticed visitors looking around with admiration. Some paused to reflect quietly in the spaces where the ceremony had taken place. Others spoke softly about the meaning of courage and respect in the presence of so many people. Marco felt proud to be part of a tradition that valued both discipline and humanity. He understood that the Pope's message was not only in his words, but also in the actions of those who carried out their duties with sincerity. The Swiss Guard, who had acted courageously, continued to perform his duties with quiet dignity. He did not seek recognition or praise, yet his action had already inspired many. Marco admired his calmness and the subtle strength in his character. The guard had shown that true honor came from acting with integrity and heart, not only from following rules. Marco thought about Pope Francis's teachings. The Pope had always encouraged people to be kind, humble, and brave. He had spoken about helping others and acting with compassion, even when it was difficult. Marco realized that the guard's action had reflected these lessons perfectly. It was a simple act, yet it carried the spirit of the Pope's message into the hearts of all who witnessed it. Word of the guard's gesture reached some of the Vatican officials, who quietly acknowledged the significance of the moment. They understood that it was not a breach of duty but an expression of respect and courage. Marco noticed that the atmosphere in the Vatican had shifted. There was a stronger sense of connection among the guards and staff, a shared understanding that human emotion could complement discipline. As the days went on, Marco felt a sense of pride and responsibility. He knew that the lessons of this ceremony would stay with him forever. The courage and sincerity displayed by the guard had reminded everyone that small acts of respect could carry great meaning. Marco felt inspired to carry these values into his future service, knowing that the heart and humanity behind every action mattered as much as the rules that guided them. The story of that small, respectful act continued to travel quietly. It reminded everyone that Pope Francis's message lived on not only in words, but also in the actions of people who chose to honor it with courage and sincerity. Marco understood that this lesson would remain with him, shaping the way he served, the way he treated others, and the way he remembered the extraordinary life of Pope Francis. Weeks had passed since the funeral of Pope Francis, but the memory of that day remained vivid in the Vatican. Marco walked through the quiet corridors, reflecting on everything he had witnessed. The ceremony had been solemn, respectful, and historic. Yet it was the small and unexpected gesture of the Swiss guard who had broken protocol that stayed with him the most. It had been a moment of courage, humility, and deep respect that no one could forget. The guard himself continued to perform his duties with calm and dignity. He did not seek attention or recognition. Marco often watched him as he moved quietly through the halls, standing perfectly still, yet carrying a presence that inspired others. His actions had reminded everyone that following rules was important, but acting with heart and sincerity mattered just as much. Marco felt proud to have witnessed such an example of courage. Visitors and staff still spoke quietly about the guard's gesture. Some had shared their experiences with friends and family, explaining how a single act of respect had changed the atmosphere of the entire ceremony. Marco realized that the moment had spread far beyond the chapel. It had inspired people to think about courage, humanity, and the ways they could honor those they admired. The impact was quiet but powerful. Marco reflected on his own growth since the funeral. He had always known the importance of discipline and precision as a Swiss guard. Yet he now understood that true honor required more than perfect posture or flawless actions. It required heart, courage, and the willingness to act with integrity, even when it meant stepping beyond the usual rules. The lesson was clear, and it would guide him in every moment of service from that day forward. The Vatican continued its work, with daily duties, ceremonies, and visitors from around the world. Yet there was a subtle change in the way people approached their roles. Guards, staff, and officials began to appreciate that small gestures could carry enormous meaning. Marco noticed that even in routine tasks, people acted with more care, thoughtfulness, and respect. The spirit of the Pope and the courage of the guard had left a lasting mark on everyone. One quiet afternoon, Marco found himself standing near the chapel where the funeral had taken place. He looked at the marble floor, the tall pillars, and the soft light streaming through the stained glass windows. Memories of that day came back clearly. The prayers, the music, the respectful gestures of everyone present, and the moment when the guard had stepped forward with courage. Marco felt a deep sense of connection to the legacy of Pope Francis and to the values the guard had demonstrated. He realized that lessons of courage and respect could be carried into everyday life, not only in grand ceremonies but in small, ordinary moments. A kind word, a thoughtful action, or a brave gesture could make a difference. Marco understood that serving with heart was as important as serving with discipline. The Pope's teachings had been reflected in that simple act of respect, and it had reminded everyone that the smallest actions could leave the strongest impressions. Marco took a deep breath and felt a sense of peace. He understood that his experience at the funeral had changed him. The courage and sincerity of the guard had become a model for how to live and serve with purpose. Marco knew that he would carry this lesson into every task, every duty, and every moment of his life. The story of that day would remain with him and with everyone who had witnessed it, a quiet but powerful reminder of what truly mattered. As the sun set over the Vatican, Marco straightened his posture and continued his duties with calm confidence. The chapel, the halls, and the gardens were filled with a sense of quiet reflection and respect. The legacy of Pope Francis lived on, not only in memories and ceremonies but also in the courage, respect, and humanity shown by those who followed their hearts. Marco smiled softly, knowing that the lessons of that day would continue to inspire him and countless others for years to come. In the end, the Swiss guard who had broken protocol had done more than honor the Pope. He had reminded the Vatican and the world that courage and sincerity could leave a lasting impact. Marco understood that true respect was shown through both action and heart, and he vowed to carry that lesson with him always. The day had ended, but its meaning would never fade.